Welcome to At Scale, the Tennessee Achieves podcast. I'm Chrissy D'Alejandro, Tennessee Achieves President and CEO. Tennessee Achieves seeks to be humble but ambitious, disruptive yet intentional, and student-focused while also data-driven. We believe our mission is simple: enhance post-secondary opportunities and outcomes by providing holistic student supports rooted in community and accountability at scale. But the work is much more complex. Since 2008, we've broken some things in a great way. We've built many things, and we've created something that stems from the idea that a college credential can be a powerful equalizer. From helping individual students navigate the complexities of college to shaping the way Tennessee thinks about preparing and educating tomorrow's workforce, this podcast explores how Tennessee Achieves intersects with partners across our state and throughout the country. Let's dig in with state and national thought partners, business and industry leaders, college and K-12 representatives, and all the others in between that inform, inspire, and interconnect with Tennessee Achieves work. Here we go. Welcome back to the At Scale podcast. I am Chrissy D'Alejandro, President and CEO of Tennessee Achieves, joined again today by Ben Sterling, who serves as our Vice President of Content. So excited for today's conversation, Ben. I think I always start off with so excited for today's conversation. We've moved in so many different directions as we kicked the podcast series back off. I really am excited to dig in today.
Yeah, I am too. I need another word other than excited. There's got to be some other words.
Ecstatic or
thrilled.
Beside myself. I can't hardly contain myself. I don't know what it would be.
Yeah, I think today's guest is it's timely considering the topics that we've already discussed. This guest is going to really provide a lot of clarification around some of the terms we've used, some of the direction our work is headed in. I think has really been inspired by this organization. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. I think we have a lot to learn today, which is always fun for us to be in a space where there's a lot to kind of glean from the conversation. So I'll let you do the formal introduction.
Sure. Thanks for that. I agree. I think the Lumina Foundation has been at the forefront of the higher ed education policy, ed to work policy since they launched. Obviously, I've been a fangirl for a very long time and remember the first iteration of the big goal coming out and how much work was poured into that and the importance of states having buy-in. And so I am thrilled today to have Melanie Heath join us. She serves as the strategy director for Access at the Lumina Foundation. And to your point, we're going to learn so much from her today. Melanie, welcome to the At Scale podcast.
Hey, Chrissy. Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we start by just getting some background on you? I was reading a bit prior to, and it sounds like you've had a very rich higher education background prior to joining the Lumina team.
Yeah. I actually still live and work in Salt Lake City. And prior to joining Lumina about 2 years ago, I worked for over 9 years at the Utah System of Higher Education. And so while I was there, I did a lot of things, actually. I worked in communications. I worked in strategic planning. I did a lot of work in post-secondary access and coordination with our state's K-12 board as well, in addition to FAFSA completion and advising and all of the things. And so I feel like Chrissy is a soul sister a little bit because I think we care a lot and have worked in a lot of the same spaces around the same issues.
Yes, I agree. It does sound like we care deeply about many of the same challenges and aspects of the work that actually move the needle for students. I would like to just ask, if you don't mind, like, why do you care about this work? Like, I was the first person in my family to go to college. It sounds so cliche, but college changed my life completely. Ben has a similar story. So I would love, like, why is this important to you?
I think my story is maybe less personal and more about what I'm just fascinated by. And I think the thing that I love about higher education is that we're fundamentally in the hope business. We're in the business of like supporting students and potential students and learners, adult learners and K-12 students in their path towards economic prosperity. And I think that just that idea that there's barriers to that kind of just drive me every day to continue the work and work on removing these barriers to that dream for a lot of students. And so it's been really fun, both when I worked deep in the state level in Utah to see the impact of a statewide program like a college advising program could have statewide. And now that I get to work at Lumina, which has a different purview, right? It's more of a national organization, and I get to see what's happening in states across the country and what different organizations are doing to remove those barriers. And that just gets me so excited and keeps me going.
Yeah, it's like I love that you talked about the hope aspect of this. I also think that it's just such an interesting puzzle to constantly piece together
That is
because,
exactly it. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's fun, it's challenging. Some days you wake up and you want to pull all your hair out because you're like, wait a second, we made
totally.
progress and now it feels like we're back to where we started in many ways. And so do we just scrap the puzzle? Do we try to rearrange the pieces? And so that's what I think is also so exciting and fascinating about this work. I would love,
I've,
Melanie, for our listeners, if you don't mind, just tell us about Lumina. Maybe people
yeah.
don't know about Lumina.
Sure. Yeah. So Lumina is a private foundation that operates out of Indianapolis, and we are one of the few large philanthropies that are devoted entirely to post-secondary attainment. Um, so one thing that Lumina is best known for is setting a goal for the nation around post-secondary attainment. So back in 2008, we set, which I think you spoke to, Chrissy, we set our kind of the nation's first attainment goal, which was 60% of our nation will have a degree or certificate by 2025. And so when we started in 2008, I think one state had an attainment goal. And now it's 2025. We are deep in this work, and 49 states actually have an attainment goal.
Somebody holding out. I don't know that we
Yeah,
should call them out,
I
but
won't. I won't. I will keep that secret. But I think it really shows just the impact that Lumina's very clear strategic direction has had in catalyzing the field towards attainment. Um, One thing that I think is interesting to note, of course, it's 2025 now, right? So what does that mean? So we actually launched our newest goal for the nation, which is a 2040 goal. So we like to plan very much in advance. We also know that things in higher education, and when you're working in systemic change, these things tend to take time. And so we want to be really thoughtful in that. Um, but I think our new goal really follows some key movements that we're seeing throughout higher education. So I think higher ed has experienced three key movements. So the first is really a movement around access. And we saw this with the introduction of the GI Bill. We saw this with the Higher Ed Act of 1965 that introduced Pell Grants and federal financial aid. It really made higher education more accessible. And while we haven't solved that problem, hence I'm still working on it, and
sure, we
many of
all
us
are.
are,
We're
yeah.
all in this together.
I think there was also a recognition across the country that access without completion is a hollow promise.
Mhm.
And so that was part of what Lumina held on to and launched with our attainment goal in 2008, right? Was this need to recognize that we've provided access to a lot of folks. There's more work to be done, but there's more work to be done to ensure students are retained, persist, and actually complete and graduate. And so that really led to this completion movement, right? I think into 2025, we're at this really interesting space where now we're starting to go into a new movement, which is a movement around value.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean the access movement or completion movements are done. It just means that we're starting to ask questions about what does it look like once you've graduated? How are is the higher education system preparing you for a life of economic prosperity afterwards? And so Lumina's new 2040 goal that we just set is 75% of adults in the labor force will have a college degree or other credential of value leading to economic prosperity. And so I think this idea of credentials of value is really undergirding and pushing our work forward for the next 15 years.
Yeah, and I love this shift in, yes, it's bigger than Access. We went through that at Tennessee Achieves.
Mhm.
I mean, when we launched in 2008, so similar time frame as Knox Achieves, it was like, can we get more students into the pipeline? And then we were like, wait a second, it's got to be bigger than just getting them in. We have to ensure that they have all the tools and support and foundation to get to the other side to that all important credential. And now this whole movement toward a credential of impact is what we're calling it in Tennessee,
Right. Yes.
credential of value, I think really pours gasoline on this, but in a great way, of access and completion. So it's not completion for completion's sake. It is completion that draws a straight line from education to economic prosperity. And I love that, and really trying to think about, because my guess is if we unpack, or if you will unpack for us, what is a credential of value, that it's about economic prosperity, but it's also about paying attention to, like, will this career be around? Is it sustainable, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that that question of what is a credential of value, um, it totally depends on the state and regional context,
Mhm.
right? A credential of value in Florida is likely different than a credential of value in Idaho, which is different from one in Hawaii, which is different from one in Maryland. And so there isn't necessarily a way to say, like, this is a credential of value, this isn't. Now we do have some systems, of course, to measure impact afterwards, and as far as wage premiums for
Sure.
those credentials. And we have more work to do because we also know strictly a wage premium is an insufficient measure on its own. How are we capturing the debt that a student might need to go into, or the cost of that credential? How are we capturing the opportunity cost of going to college instead of working during those years?
Sure.
And so some states like Texas have a very incredibly robust and a little complicated equations that actually have done some of this work. But as Lumina is working to ensure that, or working with states as they adopt new attainment goals in this value moment, I think one thing that we're hoping to see is that more states do what Tennessee has done with the credentials of impact framework, um, and think about what that looks like within their own context, and even how they can further regionalize that, right? Because I think some states are very large in a credential of impact, and the panhandle of Florida is different than the tip of Florida. And um, so I think that there is a little complexity in it, in that it's a pretty nuanced term. But I think everyone that we've spoken with, it kind of resonates, like what you're saying. I think folks are saying, yes, I went to college, my kids went to college, and that's important, but I want to make sure that that
Mhm.
investment pays off. And how can I think what we're thinking about at the systemic level is, how are some ways that we can ensure that within the system itself?
Yeah, I love how we started this conversation off by talking about like all of this is kind of a puzzle, and we're all sort of trying to figure out like which pieces fit in where. And this, I don't know, timeline, if you will, around college in America, as you've kind of discussed, from access and then really focusing on attainment, and then now really worried about what is the attainment? What are you actually attaining?
Mhm.
I love that, to Chrissy's point, how it all kind of connects together. But in Tennessee, you really talk. It's interesting that you talk about how states have it. You really need to drill down regionally. Tennessee often considers itself to have three distinct states within itself: East Tennessee, Middle
Mm.
Tennessee, and West Tennessee. We call them the three grand divisions. They each have their own identity, truly, from an economics standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. Um, so I think that makes our job, Chrissy, maybe a little even more difficult as we think
Always.
about this, you know. But I don't know, how much research have you guys done from state to state? What, if you went even further in terms of defining a credential of value, what is that? Give an example maybe of like what would be important for our coaches to be connecting students with when they're in college.
I think I mean, as I said, it's really just dependent on the context. And also, I love what you said, Ben, echoing Chrissy's point about the complex puzzle. And part of why this work is so fun is because it's like the potential is sky high and there's so much opportunity to do stuff. And also there's all these like complicated nuances and pieces and stakeholders to come together. And I think a state coming together around this idea of a credentials of value is a really interesting piece of that, right? Um, I think it really just depends. I mean, some states are looking at, my state of Utah, we're looking to really grow our industry around energy. The governor has launched a huge coalition with other Western states that are interested in really growing kind of the energy sector in our state. So, what does that mean for a credential of value,
Mhm.
right? And what does that mean for pathways into that workforce? We also have um, we have something called Silicon Slopes. And so we have a lot of mountains in Utah, but it's kind of like our tech sector. And so we actually we have Adobe here, we have some, Instructure, we have some pretty good tech companies. And so when you think of Utah, you might not think of that necessarily, but we do have these industries here with um, with these like well-paying jobs. And how can we think about, one, how we want to plan for the future of our state, but also two, how can we build like kind of backwards plan and build
Yeah,
pathways into those industries within our context.
there's work that we can do right now to start connecting those
Yeah,
students to those jobs. Yeah,
exactly.
Tennessee, especially East Tennessee, we talked about this. It has its own identities across the state. But East Tennessee, we had Dr. Steven Streifer on a couple of weeks ago, who's the lab director for Oak Ridge National Lab, and that idea around jobs around energy, it's
Hmm.
robust in East Tennessee. So I think there maybe are some connectors there between Utah and Tennessee.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think for a student-facing organization like Tennessee Achieves, you're doing Lumina Foundation, Melanie, you guys are doing this work of conceptualizing and ensuring that we're all being really data-driven in how we think about this North Star, which I love. Um, and I think it's our jobs then to try to figure out how to translate that within the student context because it is complex. I've seen the Texas work, which is impressive, but
Hmm.
making sure that students and families can receive it in a way that feels consumable, accessible, I think is really where this work needs to head next. Would you
Mhm.
agree? Or tell us somebody that's doing that really well so we can go like have conversations with them.
I I love this question because we're actually starting on some work that's doing just this.
Mm,
I think, and when I say we, I mean my Access team in
great.
particular, because I think it's such an important question as states are grappling with what's the data we need, how can we align data systems to ensure that we can see what graduate outcomes are and how can we track them and all of those things, asking all of them. As someone who worked in a state system office, I know that this often what happens is there's this really robust data set that you get, and then it lives in a dashboard that no one ever sees.
Yeah, it's hidden
Right. It's
away.
hidden
Yeah.
and it's complicated, and
Yes.
you don't know what the words mean and what is a sip to sock crosswalk, like all of the
Oh,
things,
gosh, yes.
And so I think you're hitting on something that we've noticed too, is that there needs to be a really explicit use case for these data as states are developing them. We also know that a student is never going to find it on their own. You could have a very flashy website, and maybe that's great, but a student, I think, is not going to Google credential of value, find a website, and then like look at it for post-secondary planning purposes. Like
Never
that's
going
just
to
not,
happen.
no, no,
Yeah.
no. And so I think one thing that we've identified too is you really need a person to
Mhm.
talk to about this, right?
Yes.
And so we're really looking at states who have, a state like Tennessee that has a pretty robust infrastructure around post-secondary advising, both for adults, as far as like adult navigators,
Mhm.
or for the K-12 population. And thinking about, one, how can we ensure those credentials of value frameworks are being integrated into the advising curriculum? And two, how can we support kind of the adults in the room who are talking to students about, so that they have a good understanding of what a credential of value is too? Because it's a fairly new concept that I think is a little complicated. The last thing I'll say about that is I think that some of our advising models are a little too focused, I would say, on institutional match and fit, and some of those more
Mhm.
traditional concepts of college fit. Um, and what we're really interested in is how can we have conversations about career earlier in advising programs, and then say, okay, well, you want this career, here's the majors, here's where they are, kind of start there. So we're currently in talks with a few different states. I know Florida's College Access Network, FCAN, is doing some really interesting work in this space. But I think it's something that advising kind of champions and practitioners across the country are also grappling with in this broader higher ed movement of value.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. And to be like, an organization that has troops on the ground. So I don't know if you're familiar, but we have 30 plus coaches embedded on the community college campuses that are not doing academic advising, but are really doing relational, proactive, deep dive coaching with students. So they have a cohort of students that they are working with, and we built a curriculum. And so we are moving in this space of not necessarily coaching the students differently, but the lens through which we are approaching coaching is moving in a different direction. So,
Mm-hmm.
obviously in community colleges, when you ask students who are freshmen, 60 to 70% of them say they have intentions to transfer. And so, but even those students, we're talking about early exposure to different careers. So we have this robust job shadowing opportunity that we're trying to lift up for students. But I agree completely in the fact that, I think about, now I'm going to just totally birdwalk, but I think about these assessments that students get. So I have a 15-year-old and he took a career assessment when he was in eighth grade, and then they gave us a piece of paper. No one walked him through it. I mean, luckily or not so luckily, his mother is in this work. So he probably got way more than he bargained for. But I think about the student who goes home like with it all crumpled up, like in his backpack, and no one ever looks at it, or if they do, like they don't know what to
Mm-hmm.
make of it. And so really trying to think about, so knowing that Florida is stepping into this space, like how can we learn from others, or think about being at the forefront of, maybe this is not academic advising, but we can certainly help influence and provide awareness to a student population that, quite frankly, I think doesn't have a great
Mm-hmm.
understanding. So I love all of those things.
And I think that's really important how you hit on both, even in middle school, how
Mhm.
these conversations happen, because I think we know it needs to start as early as possible to get students to start thinking about post-secondary. But then there's also a continuum you mentioned into community college while a student is in college, continuing the conversation. And I think that's one thing that we're interested in looking at in Lumina too, across many of my colleagues, is like all of the places that advising or advisors or coaches are interacting with students. What do all of those conversations look like? And can there be a more clear kind of continuum where they all echo each other in some
Yeah,
way?
the
Um,
handoff feels really seamless.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
So valuable for students.
yeah, absolutely. And it's really hard to do. And there's 1,000 million puzzle pieces, like we talked about, to
Yes.
combine. But I think about the student experience, and the complexity of the world right now is just a lot. And the more simpler we can make our systems to navigate, I think that can only help.
Yeah, do you see this? I mean, this may not be a fair question to ask you, Melanie. So if you're like,
Oh, cool.
this is too no go here. But do you feel like that this credentials of value work will lend itself to a more simplistic higher ed system? Sort of at, like from my vantage point, I'm going to use a terrible like analogy, but when I go into a restaurant and there are pages and pages and pages and pages of the menu, right? It's
Mm.
it's very overwhelming. Like, I don't know what I want to eat. Like they do waffles really well here, but they also do like, I don't know, something totally
Lasagna or
great. Yeah,
something.
lasagna. That is
Yeah.
great. Perfect. Thank you. I was like, go somewhere totally different. Um, and so, there's a part of me that's like, yes, there's a tourniquet situation here where we've got to get to students quickly and introduce this credentials of value work. But ultimately, the goal maybe is that there are 3 pages, um, comprehensive still, but it's not waffles and lasagna and, 27 pages in between. Is that a fair question? Do you see where I'm going with this? Do we see that there's a simpler higher ed system on the other side for students?
I love this question because it is something I think about all the time. Um, I think what you're talking about is complexity,
Hmm.
right? Where we have, and there's a lot. Oh my Lord, I'm sorry. How long is this podcast?
Keep going.
Because now
We got
you've
all
like
kinds
Here
of
for
opened the
stuff.
days.
you've
If
opened
we
the floodgates
learn, we'll just
here.
keep going.
So,
We can make this a two-parter if you want to.
oh, poor Ben. So because what you're really talking about is complexity, right? And there's a lot of reason for that, and it doesn't come about through bad intention. I
Never.
think we have just this natural human propensity to make things more complicated. And we do that through something called additive bias, right? We always want to add and we never want to subtract.
Mhm.
And there's some interesting examples using behavioral science about this, right? So, do you know what a balance bike is?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's such an interesting example where when we're teaching kids to ride bikes, our first idea was to add training wheels, like more wheels onto the bike.
Mhm.
But we know what actually works better and is like proven to work better is actually taking the wheels off and just do it using a balance bike, right?
Yes.
Taking the training wheels off and taking the pedals off. And
Yes.
so a kid can just practice balancing. And that I think is a really interesting example of how subtraction is often a really good thing. Another higher ed specific example using behavioral science, which is I love this example, is a new president came into a university and asked staff for ideas on how to make the university better. And 89% of the ideas were about adding a policy or a program or a process, and
Mhm.
only 11% of them were about taking something away. And so I think that just really speaks to kind of like our natural human
Mhm.
way that we just want to add things. But I think when that goes unchecked, like it kind of has in higher ed, what we get is incredible complexity within a system, particularly for a student to navigate. And Lumina has done some research with Gallup talking about this like complexity or lack of transparency, I think is another way to think about it. And we've known for a long time, like Chrissy, I'm sure you know, working in the access space, we know that complexity really harms access for
Mhm.
students. Because
Mhm.
when we have complex processes and systems, it requires time and resources and social networks to navigate, right? Um, but the thing that we're learning now, particularly in this moment of value and with all of like the narrative change around us, um, we're also finding that complexity is actually destroying trust in higher ed. And so I think it's this really important thing for us to grapple with, right? And I would put in that same bucket complexity, lack of transparency, a lot of those things. So the reason you've gotten on me on my like hobby horse over here is a lot of my work at Lumina has focused on simplicity, particularly in the admissions space. And so a couple years ago, I launched something called the Great Admissions Redesign, where we asked the country for kind of the best ideas on how states and systems and colleges and universities could fundamentally simplify the admissions process to make college more accessible. Um, we were blown away by the response. We had over 70 applications, and we found that this is something that a lot of states and systems are grappling with too, is how can we fundamentally transform the admissions process towards simplicity? And I'm happy to talk there, but again, I don't know how long this podcast is
Yeah,
about to be, but like
this is awesome.
I think like this idea about this tension between like complexity and simplicity, I think is going to be kind of at the core of the next fundamental kind of redesign of higher education writ large.
I've always felt so strongly about this. I've worked with Tennessee Achieves for 11 years, and I feel like just always in my mind, it's like this just doesn't have to be this hard. And I
Yes.
always reflect back to when I was a high school senior. I was a first generation college student. My parents weren't engaged in my college journey really at all.
Mm,
And so I remember I was fortunate to be part of the first class of what it was then called Knox Achieves. It's called Tennessee Achieves now, but it was Knox Achieves then. And I remember the fall of my senior year, I applied for Knox Achieves,
mm.
and I thought that was it. Like I thought that was all I had to do to go to college. I thought I could just show up in
Yeah.
August, and somebody, I guess magically, would just be there to tell me where to go. And I reflect on that probably once a month because that
Mm.
still happens where students will
Yeah.
apply for Tennessee Promise and then they're surprised to learn that then you have to file FAFSA and then you have to actually apply to college. That shocked me that I actually had to apply. But then you still have to enroll,
Yep.
set up a class
Oh
schedule.
yeah, you're not done.
And then there was multiple semesters where I didn't confirm my classes. So then I got dropped from all my classes and nice people like Chrissy saved the day. But it was like, I think about how complicated for someone like me, who I would have argued I was a pretty well prepared student academically. I just didn't
Mm.
have that network to
Hmm.
walk me through all of these steps. It sounds like in Tennessee we're making some progress on that. So do you want to talk a little bit about where we are on that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm really excited about a project that I'm supporting this fall with THEC and TBR and in partnership with the governor's office.
Our friends
We,
at the state are also very excited. So,
yeah,
yeah.
and they've been excellent to work with. I think I don't know, it's no surprise to us at Lumina that Tennessee is once again at the forefront of something really big because that tends to be what Tennessee does. Um, but we are actually standing up um, direct admissions in Tennessee. So I'm curious, do y'all know what direct admissions is? Would it be
I
helpful to
do,
give a
but
little? Okay.
explain it to our
Good
listener.
way of defining it. So would
Yeah.
love to have the nuts and bolts of that.
Yeah, sure. So direct admissions was first started in Idaho in 2015. And the general idea behind it is that a student is notified proactively where they're eligible to attend college, and then they fill out a dramatically simplified application that is basically just an enrollment form choosing where they want to go. And so it's it follows these principles of simplicity. The thing I love about the proactive piece of it is one, most states have all of the data they need to make an admissions decision already.
Hmm.
And so having a student fill out an additional application is often unnecessary. Um, and so in direct admissions, it just follows this idea that students should be informed upfront and before they even apply where they are accepted. and then they get to choose where they want to go and then just go. In Idaho, what they saw, they did a robust experiment or a robust peer-reviewed research study on this program. And they found that I think it increased enrollment at open access institutions between 4 and 8%.
Mm.
And it also increased the likelihood that a student stays in state, like around 8 to 11%.
Wow.
And so the thing about direct admissions, and if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. If a student is self-identifying as a college-going student, and then they get a letter that says these colleges accept you, they're still going to go. Like it's not
Right.
really changing behavior.
Zero sum at this point. But I do
But
think addressing some of the trust challenges, right? Even in that.
right. Well, what I was gonna say is like for students who are on the bubble, right? Who are like, I don't know if I want to go. Is college for me? They're getting a letter that says not only is college for you, you are college material. We want you here. We're saving a seat for you. And I think we can talk about the tie that has to like belonging literature and other things, but it's a really interesting, I think, mindset shift for a student. And so what we know is that direct admissions works best for students who are kind of on that no or no go or no go bubble. So it was like a very long explanation of direct admissions.
No, I think
I
that's great.
the thing that's interesting about it is there are over 20 states now have some type of this program, direct admissions program. So researchers are feeling like direct admissions is going to become the norm by which most students access college within a decade. So it's like it's blown up, it's happening everywhere. And very excitingly, it's happening in Tennessee. So the thing that's the most exciting about the work in Tennessee, well, there's many things, so I'll try to pick just a few. But one is y'all are doing it in the right way. So we know that in Tennessee, y'all can correct me on this, isn't it that over 90% of students fill out Tennessee Promise application?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, incredible infrastructure that you already have.
Yes.
So we're just the teams in Tennessee are just working on adding a couple questions on the back of the Tennessee Promise application.
I've heard three.
Yeah.
I'm not in the Plan A meetings, but I'm on the Plan B meetings. So I probably know just enough to be dangerous.
I'm sure you know way more than me at this point, but the exciting thing is that will then serve as the admissions application for a huge number of institutions.
Which is like just the dreamiest situation.
I love that word dreamy. It is so dreamy.
It's so dreamy.
And so, but not only are they doing that, they're also, or I will say y'all, are also one of the first to think about this concept of direct state aid. So not only is Tennessee thinking about direct admissions and will be implementing it this fall, they also want to upfront, approve students for state aid programs, Tennessee Promise, Tennessee Hope, and Tennessee Works. And so the idea is a student will get this letter that says, hey, Chrissy, you are accepted to 14 colleges and you have $20,000 in state aid that you already qualify for. And then there's, a QR code so you can follow up with further instructions. But I think about how meaningful that would be for a student and their families to get that and how clarifying it would be to our earlier conversation. The other thing that Tennessee's doing that I think blows me away is they're doing all of this in a giant experiment. Mm-hmm. And so not only is Tennessee implementing something, they're also studying through, it's like a 45,000 student randomized control trial, which is the largest I've ever heard of, to see if it works and for whom. And I think that's something really, really innovative that Tennessee is doing. A lot of states would be, or might not be that open to receiving feedback on an initiative.
No, sure. Yeah.
But I think it's so groundbreaking to have a state be like, we want to try this, but we also really want to see if it works and how. So really, really exciting stuff going on in Tennessee. And again, on the forefront, the very cutting edge of all the things.
Yeah, I love this project, and when THEC first approached me about it, it is so I could go on a soapbox all day long about
Yeah.
what I call Rotunda College, where the post-secondary institution sets up in the hallway or the rotunda, and then the fancy like cloth comes out, and then there's a pamphlet, and someone stands there and they wait on students to come to them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not moving the needle. I don't know that it ever did, to your point. I think that works for the student who has already identified as a college goer. Like, oh, I'm really interested in, like, my 15-year-old would walk up to that. He's going to college. It's where. So I
Mm-hmm.
want to hear from Wake Forest. I want to hear from Vanderbilt. I want to hear from UT. But
Mm-hmm.
for a student who doesn't identify as a college goer, that does zero. I'm just convinced. So that's my rotunda sort of spiel always. But this is proactive, right? Like this is
Yep.
proactively saying you belong in post-secondary. And not only do you belong, but we're going to help you get there both. And I continue to push in on let's do the financial piece. And maybe this next version, we talk about the support systems that do
Mm-hmm.
exist once you land there. Because while I think funding is so critical, I always say it's the carrot that brings students and families to post-secondary. It isn't necessarily what's going to get them to the finish line. Going full
Mm-hmm.
circle back to our credential of value conversation, like what systems exist? Because for me, I was like, even though I was first generation, like I had lots of funding, which was so great. But once I got there, I was like, I have no idea. And this was before first gen was a term, and I did not go to a post-secondary institution with it. No one else I know was the first person in their family to go. And so it was like a really interesting like navigation for me. But I love, you are correct. We are soul sisters in the fact that the proactiveness of this is so
Mm-hmm.
exciting. And I could also get on a soapbox about the simplicity. I talk all the time about, and Ben knows this, like, why do we keep adding things when what we could do is pluck a lot of things out that we know aren't working? And we actively do that at Tennessee Achieves. I'm like, if it's not working, it's too much time and resource and whatnot. So
Mm-hmm.
this has been so incredibly helpful and exciting. Melanie, I knew from your bio that you were smart, but now I know you are a pioneer and an innovator, and I'm just so thankful that you
Kind.
chose to spend time with us. I will say, as sort of a final question, if you had a magic wand and you could wave that wand, what do you think
Mm.
would be the highest impact practice that we could implement?
Oh my goodness.
I
That
know
is
it's so
such a
hard.
good question. My brain is thinking about all of those puzzle pieces that we talked about earlier.
I know it's hard to pick one, right? Because you're like,
I
this
know it's so
matters and this
hard.
matters. Yeah.
It's so hard. I think, and I think that's why I'm struggling a little bit to pick just one, just because one doesn't work on its own. There's none
It
of these are
never
silver
does.
bullets,
Yeah.
even direct admissions, which I am excited to see more and learn more about in my work. And I've seen it do incredible things. On its own, it's insufficient as well, right? You really need, it tackles the first thing. Do I belong? Yes, you belong. And it takes the anxiety out of the way. In ideal state, it removes administrative burden for students too. But I think the Tennessee project is really forward thinking, and one of the biggest burdens or barriers to post-secondary is cost. So how can we address that in a systemic, proactive, transparent way? But then to your point, those are big, but they're also not enough. Once they get there, what does that mean? And how are we supporting students through and having conversations about career? So I hate to take kind of the chicken exit here, but it's like, I don't know if there's one I would choose. But I do think like um, at a higher level, this idea around simplicity in process, in navigation, in choice, all of those things to me, really undergirds what success looks like in the next phase of higher ed, around how can you make a campus more simpler to navigate? How can you make, like, even campus supports, right? There's so many, but how are students finding them? What does that look like? How are we, changing it from a door on the front to just like an open hallway where you go, so yeah, that was a very unfair answer.
No, I think simplicity is the answer. Just simplify, right? I mean, that is an answer. And I do think that it's interesting too. Like, I even think about Tennessee Promise and how, like, when we launched in 2014, this statewide, like, the beauty of Tennessee Promise was that it was simple. I will tell you, 10 years later, it is not as simple as it was a decade later, right? And I'm like,
as tends to happen, like we talked about,
because then we're like, well, what about this?
Yes, additive bias. Yeah,
it makes me crazy that and so we're continuing to beat the drum and try to untangle some of the things, but it is it's challenge to keep things like simple and easy for whatever reason.
It is absolutely, especially in a field like higher education where everyone you work with is brilliant and everyone has great ideas, and like it's hard to be disciplined and narrow to keep things simple, but I think it's worth it for students in the end.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Melanie, this has been so great. I'm so glad that you joined us and shared all of, gosh, you really have a great storybook here, and I'm excited to see how Tennessee students continue to benefit from the work that you're doing. So thanks for all you do.
No, thanks so much for having me. It was great to chat with you both.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this episode of At Scale, the Tennessee Achieves podcast. Each conversation is a step toward a deeper understanding of how we can collectively expand opportunity and increase post-secondary access and success for all students in Tennessee. To continue following this work, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Subscribing ensures you never miss an episode, and your rating or review helps others discover the stories and insights that we'll share. Together, we're not only supporting students, we're building Tennessee's future workforce. Thank you for listening.